If you bought silver into that shakeout, this next few minutes is for you. Not the day traders. Not the people who wandered in last week. You, the one who watched silver get knocked down into the mid-50s, felt your stomach drop, and bought anyway. Or gritted your teeth and held anyway while everyone around you called you a fool. I want to talk to you first, before anybody else. Because here is what just happened. Silver has clawed its way back above 60 after that flush. And if you were one of the people who did not panic and sell into the ugliest part of it, you are sitting on something right now that most of this platform will not say to your face. You were right when it was hard to be right. But I know the question that is actually in your head, because it is the honest one. Is this really my moment? Or is this just a bounce before the next leg down? That is the question the title of this video asks. And I am going to answer it for you by the end, honestly, and not with a price, because a price would be a lie, with something more useful than a price. So here is my promise to you. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why this moment belongs to the people who held through the pain, why that is not luck and it is not hype, and how to make sure you are still standing to collect if the bigger move the bulls keep talking about ever actually shows up. And there is one thing, one single difference. It separated the people who survived the last great shakeout exactly like this one and walked away rich from the people who did everything right and still sold at the very bottom. It was not conviction. It was not smarts. It was not better information. It was one thing, and I am saving it for the last few minutes, because it is the part that nobody flashing a target at you will ever put on their screen. Stay with me, and it is yours. Because before we touch a single silver number, I need to take you somewhere. Since this exact movie has played in America before, and a lot of you watching me are old enough to remember the theater. Go back to the middle of the 1970s. Picture an ordinary man, not a Wall Street man, a saver, a man who did his own arithmetic at his own kitchen table. He had watched the dollar get cut loose from gold at the start of that decade, watched his grocery bill climb month after month, and he did a quiet, unfashionable thing. He took a slice of his savings and he bought gold coins. He bought them as gold climbed up out of the old $35 world, up and up, until by the middle of that decade gold was pushing right up toward $200 an ounce. He felt, for the first time in years, like he was finally protecting his family instead of watching the current pull his money out to sea. His brother-in-law bought some too, late, near the top, because it was working and everybody likes a thing that is working. And then the floor gave out. From up around $200, gold did not glide. It got cut almost in half. It fell all the way back toward $100 an ounce, right in the middle of the very inflation he had bet on, which made no sense to him at all. And the financial press had a field day. They wrote the obituary. The gold thing was a fad, they said, a mania that had finally broken, a lesson for the rubes who fell for it. His brother-in-law read those same pages, looked at his own statement, showing half his money gone, and he sold. He got out. He told our man at a family dinner that he had learned his lesson and that the smart money was long gone. And our man sat there at that table, holding the same loss, feeling like the last fool still standing, and every voice with a microphone agreed with the brother-in-law. Now hold both of those men there, because this is the whole video. That drop, from 200 down toward 100, was not the end of the gold story. It was the shakeout inside the story. From that beaten-down bottom near $100, gold went on to run all the way to $850 an ounce by the end of the decade. The brother-in-law, who did everything the financial pages told him, who was sensible and cut his losses, locked in a 50% loss at almost the exact worst moment. And our man, who was called a fool at his own dinner table, who simply refused to sell into the panic, saw his gold multiply many times over from where it sat when everyone was laughing at him. Same metal, same decade, same information available to both. Two completely different lives, and the only thing that separated them was which one sold the shakeout and which one did not. That is the tribe you just joined, because what happened to you in silver these past stretches is that story, playing again, in your metal, in your account. Silver got shaken down into the mid-50s in a hard, fast, ugly flush, its lowest in the better part of a year. The obituaries came out. The bottom is falling out. Silver is done. The story is broken. And then it did what silver does. It snapped back and clawed its way above 60, with silver leading gold the whole way up. If you held through that, you are our man at the kitchen table. And the people who sold into the mid-50s, who read the obituary and believed it, they are the brother-in-law. This is your moment precisely because you earned it in the part that hurt. Now, let me be blunt with you about who wrote those obituaries, because you deserve to know who was on the other side of your trade. When silver got flushed into the mid-50s, it was not because the world suddenly needed less of it. The deficit did not end. China did not stop pulling physical metal. The solar factories did not shut down. What happened is what always happens. The price of silver is set in paper markets, in contracts that can be sold by the thousands in seconds by people who have never touched an ounce and never will. And when the mood turned, when the Federal Reserve under Kevin Warsh started talking hawkish and the fear of higher rates crept in, those paper desks hit the sell button all at once, and they drove the screen price down into the mid-50s fast enough to make your hands sweat. That is the shakeout machine. And here is the part the financial channels will never tell you to your face. That machine runs on your fear. It needs you to sell. The whole point of a violent flush is to frighten weak hands into handing their metal to strong hands at a discount. Every ounce the brother-in-law sold at the bottom, somebody with more patience was quietly buying. They were counting on you to panic, and this time, you didn't. And that is exactly the moment I need to stop and talk to you directly, because this is where a real decision quietly sits, especially if you are the person this channel is truly for. If you are sitting on $100,000 or more in a retirement account, a 401k, an IRA, anything you spent a working life filling, then a moment like this one, right after a shakeout, is precisely where the choices you make actually count, and where the difference between owning something real and owning a paper promise of it turns out to be the entire ballgame. I put together a free retirement protection guide for exactly this reason. It walks through, in plain English, how some retirees are moving a portion of their savings into physical gold and silver without triggering taxes or penalties, held inside the tax-advantaged account they already have, metal they actually hold, rather than a number that some paper desk can slam around on a screen. If you are watching this on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. And if you go through it and want to talk it over, there is a free, no-obligation, one-on-one educational session for folks with $100,000 or more in any retirement account. No pressure, nothing to buy, just answers. All right, now back to your moment, because I promised you the why, and the why has real teeth. Why does the metal belong to the holders and not the sellers? Because everything that made silver worth buying before the shakeout is still standing after it. This is the piece the sellers never think through. Silver has run a structural deficit for 6 straight years now. 6 years where the world used more silver than it mined and plugged the gap by draining hundreds of millions of ounces out of above-ground vaults to cover the shortfall. That did not reverse because the paper price dipped for a few weeks. If anything, the flush made it worse because cheaper metal gets consumed faster. And silver is not like gold. Gold gets hoarded and sits in vaults, and nearly every ounce ever mined still exists somewhere. Silver gets burned. It goes into solar panels and electronics and the guts of 1,000 devices in amounts so tiny it is not worth recovering. It is consumed and gone. So you have a metal the world eats a little more of every year, mined mostly as an afterthought of digging for copper and zinc, which means the miners cannot simply answer a price signal by producing more of it. When demand cannot flex and supply cannot flex, there is only one thing left in the whole equation that is free to move, and that is the price. That is why silver whips so violently in both directions. The flush into the mid-50s and the snapback above 60 are the same coin, and it is why the people who understand it do not sell the down part. But here is the part that actually changes things, and almost nobody gets to it. So let me shift gears and slow down. Because I do not want you walking out of here thinking that holding is the same thing as being guaranteed a payday. It is not. And the difference is the whole reason our man survived and his brother-in-law did not, and I am building toward it. Let me give you the bull's arithmetic first, honestly, because you should understand the case being made in your name. There is a number people watch called the gold-silver ratio. It is simply how many ounces of silver it takes to buy 1 ounce of gold. During the shakeout, it stretched up into the 70s because gold barely flinched while silver got hammered. Gold, for its part, has quietly rallied back over 4,100 to a multi-week high, calm as you like, no drama, while silver was doing gymnastics. And as silver led the recovery, that ratio eased back into the high 60s. Now, here is the math a growing number of analysts put on the table, and I want you to hear it as their case, not my promise. If gold merely holds where it is, a bit above 4,000, and if that ratio compresses back toward levels it has actually visited in living memory, silver's implied price is just gold divided by that smaller number. Back in 1980, at the peak, That ratio compressed to around 17. Run 4,000 divided by 17, and you land in the neighborhood of a couple $150 an ounce. Even a more modest compression to around 40 points at triple-digit silver, up around $100. That is where the $100 and the $150 and the $250 targets you have seen actually come from. It is division, not magic. And it is the case a rising number of serious voices are making, that triple-digit silver is no longer a fringe idea. But it is a case. It is not a promise, and anyone who hands it to you as a promise is not on your side. And I have to say the next part plainly, because you will run into it. There are voices out at the far edge calling for $1,000 silver or $50,000 gold, some clean 30-fold multiple. I am not going to insult you by pretending those come from the same solid place as the ratio math. They do not. Those numbers come from imagining a full monetary reset, a dollar rebuilt from scratch on the metal in the vaults, and then applying an old ratio to that reimagined world. That is a story about the end of the financial system, not about next year. The bigger the number, the more it is assumptions stacked on assumptions, and the more skepticism it has earned. I lay it out so you understand the whole spectrum, not because anyone alive can hand you that number or a date it arrives. Which brings me back to our man, and to the one thing I promised you at the very top, the single difference. Here is the honest truth, and I need it to land because it is the thing I cannot say often enough. I cannot promise you a price, and I cannot promise you a date, and the second anyone does either one, you should close their video and never come back. Silver is the most violent major metal there is. It overshoots wildly up and just as wildly down. You just watched it flush into the mid-50s and snap back above 60 in a matter of days. And it can turn around and do the ugly version again just as fast. It could fall back below where it just broke out. It could stay cheap for longer than you think you can stand. And even if every one of those analysts turns out to be dead right about where it ends up, the road there can take years, and it can be brutal enough to break your grip at the worst possible moment. A few good days off the lows is not a confirmation of anything, and the hawkish Fed risk has not gone away. In the short run, silver answers to the Fed, the dollar, and raw sentiment, not to the deficit. The shortage is the trend. The Fed is the weather, and the weather can soak you for a long time before the trend ever shows up on your doorstep. So what actually separated our man from his brother-in-law? It was not that he saw $850 coming. He didn't. Nobody did. It was not that he had better information than the man who sold. They read the same newspapers. The one thing, the whole thing, was this. Our man was never in a position where he could be forced to sell. He had sized it so that a 50% drop, as sick as it made him, could not touch his mortgage, could not touch his groceries, could not put a gun to his head and make him hand his metal to somebody else at the bottom. The brother-in-law did not sell because he lost his conviction. He sold because his position was too big for his stomach and, underneath that, too big for his life. Being right and being early feel exactly the same while you are holding through the drawdown. Only one of them ever pays. And the only people who collect are the ones who set it up so they could survive the middle. That is the difference. That is the number nobody flashing a target will ever show you, because a drawdown does not fit on a thumbnail, but it decides everything. So here is what to actually do with your own position, and this is not advice. It is just how a calm person thinks it through. First, on the metal, not the promise. The entire difference between the people who survived the 70s and the people who got wiped out was whether they held the real thing or a leveraged paper claim on it that somebody else could yank away in a margin call. Second, size it so a shakeout cannot force your hand. If a drop like the one our man lived through would force you to sell something at the bottom to pay a bill, then your position is too big, no matter how right the thesis is, because being forced to sell in the valley is exactly how right people still lose. And third, never, ever sell into the shakeout. The shakeout is the machine that transfers metal from the people who feel to the people who own. You already refused to be the fuel once. Do not become it on the next flush. If you are watching on your TV, the QR code is on your screen one more time. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. It costs you nothing to be informed, and the honest reason to look now is not fake urgency. It is the plain fact that the time to think a decision like this through calmly is exactly when nothing feels like an emergency, which is right now, in the quiet after the shakeout, not the day everyone is panicking again. And for those of you who stayed with me all the way to the end, here is something just for you. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, and you mention that you watched this full video, you can claim a free, one-on-one, no-obligation educational web conference. A real conversation about what you actually own versus what you only think you own, no pressure and nothing to buy. That is for the folks at that level who made it all the way here, and you are one of them. So, is this really your moment? Yes. But hear what I mean by that, because it is the honest answer to the question you clicked on. Your moment is not a guarantee that silver runs to some number on a thumbnail. Nobody can hand you that. Your moment is this. You already passed the test that the shakeout was built to make you fail. You held when it was hard, when the obituaries were printed, when the smart-sounding people told you it was over. That is the exact thing that separated the man who saw $850 from the man who sold near 100. It was never about the price. It was about who was still holding when the price finally moved. And that man at his kitchen table, the one they laughed at, the one who sat there feeling like the last fool in the family, he held. He told his kids years later that he was not brave. He was just too stubborn and too well-positioned to be forced out, and stubborn turned out to be enough. He was still standing at the end to watch $100 become $850. The big move in silver may come and it may not, and no honest person can tell you which. But the lesson of the men who live the real thing is the only sure thing in this entire video. Do not just be right. Set your life up so you are still standing to see it pay. You already did the hard part. Now do not undo it.